Well, welcome everybody to the AG2PI workshop on Introduction to Computing for Biologists. I'm Ryan Bartlemy. I'm a science analyst and instructor at CyVerse, and I will be leading the workshop alongside some of the other co-hosts of this. Can kind of go around the room and introduce the people that will be helping out. Tyson, you want to go first?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Tyson Swetnam. I'm a research assistant professor at University of Arizona. I worked for CyVerse for about 5 years. My specialty is in geoinformatics, but I've been working a lot with agricultural researchers and geneticists for the last 4 years. And I'll be teaching some of the sections this morning on introductions to CyVerse.
And Eric?
Hi all, I am Eric Lyons. I'm a professor at the University of Arizona in the School of Plant Sciences. I'm one of the PIs of CyVerse, and I'm also one of the PIs of the AG2PI project sponsored by the USDA. And I'm here as a helper.
And Meg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Meg Staten. I'm at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology, but I do computational genomics primarily. I will be helping to teach the command line and just generally helping with any of your questions during this course.
And Amanda.
Hey, I'm a CyVerse science team analyst. I'm here as a helper today. I normally do transcriptomics and genomics type research, primarily with agricultural data. So I'm here as a helper.
And Mary Margaret.
Hi, I'm Mary Margaret. I've been with the CyVerse project for quite a while, and I'm here as a helper today, so holler if you have any questions.
And I think that's Tina is our last helper to be introduced.
Hi, sorry. I'm Tina Lee, and I'm a helper on today's meeting. Nice to meet you all. I'm with CyVerse also.
So just a kind of a brief overview of what we'll be doing with this workshop. So in the email that you all received, hopefully you received it, because you're here, you got the Zoom info. There's a read the docs page, which will have the agenda for today, Thursday, and Friday. And today we're going to spend most of the time going over the CyVerse cyber infrastructure, which is free to use for all of you with your academic accounts. So this will be something you can kind of take away back to your research groups, and you can use this in your own research. We'll go over some of the data hosting, some of the different applications that are available on CyVerse, kind of just scratching the surface of what's capable with the resources that we have available. And then on Thursday, we will go over the UNIX shell, which is one of the sort of building blocks of computational research. It's probably the foundation of a lot of different applications. It's useful for anything from the CyVerse resources to your own computer, to going all the way up to like Amazon Web Services in the cloud. So this will be a skill that with practice over time, you'll be able to use it in a bunch of different ways. So we're going to spend all day Thursday on that. And then on Friday, we're going to do more of a fully interactive workshop or day of the workshop rather, in our studio on CyVerse. And we're going to take some agricultural phenomics data that I have from one of the studies that I've worked on. And we're going to go through how to select the data and clean the data and make like a publication-worthy plot at the end of by the end of Friday. So that will be what we're doing for the next, like it would say 3 days, but it's spread out over 4 days, 3 full days of workshops. And then this morning, Tyson Swetnam will be starting us off with the CyVerse introductions to the discovery environment. And I don't know if you would you like to just get started on that, Tyson?
Yeah, I can get going. Let me start to share my screen. Okay, can you all see my desktop?
Yes.
Okay, so right now I'm at the website for the workshop. Obviously you guys found this and navigated your way here. We have our code of conduct, which we've asked you guys to read. I'll let you do it on your own time, possibly over a break. Ryan brought up the agenda for today. So this first step, we're going to go through this CyVerse walkthrough. And we have a link here to click onto the discovery environment overview. Most of these links are also here in the table of contents on the left side. So you can go ahead. If you have a second monitor, I encourage you to open the website and then leave it open in that second pane so you can help follow along. But basically, we have a description here of how we'll be working within the CyVerse data science workbench, which we call the discovery environment this morning. Just kind of briefly, for those of you that have not heard of CyVerse, we are in our, is it 13th year, Eric? Thereabouts? Yeah, so CyVerse started 13 years ago as the iPlant Collaborative. It was the first large cyber infrastructure investment by the National Science Foundation into plant sciences. So that's why it was called iPlant. By the end of the 5th year, they had developed a working cyber infrastructure and the community had started to use it. The grant was renewed for an additional 5 years. At that point, we had a workbench that was up and running, this discovery environment, which you all are about to see, which is running on a cyber infrastructure. So on many different resources at the University of Arizona and the Texas Advanced Computing Center. We have what we call the data store, which is cloud storage for hosting those data. And so we began to build these bioinformatic pipelines using these different resources. There were many other scientists which found iPlant and started to use iPlant. And those included astronomers, folks like me who came from forest ecology. You had many different disciplines that were all using this. And I guess I'll just lay it on the astronomers, but they were complaining about the name iPlant Collaborative for hosting their astronomy data. So CyVerse was rebranded in about 8 years ago. And so it means Cyber Universe. And we dropped the iPlant moniker, but we still have iPlant hiding out in some of our resources. You guys will see this when we talk about the data store later today. And so the discovery environment is what we call a workbench. And it's this interface through our browser that we can use to connect to other resources. So we're all going to start virtual machines this morning running on the discovery environment, which will put us into an integrated development environment called RStudio. But just to follow along here, and actually, I'm sorry, I'm shooting ahead a little bit. I want us to do a really quick introduction for ourselves. So what you can do right now is in your browser or even on your cell phone, you can go to polev.com and then /tswetnam 687. And let me put this into the chat. Looks like it's working. Oops, you know what? I just gave you guys the wrong URL. So it happens to be hand type stuff. And I'm looking at the chat. So we, just to double check with Ryan, we do have a breakout room for anyone that gets stuck. We can go to a breakout room and help you troubleshoot with one of our helpers. Okay. Starting to see some activity. It looks like people are finding this. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So I have another question for y'all. So in this response, you can type in what your opinion is of what is the cloud. So when you think about cloud, what do you think of first of all? And then as people respond to this, I think you're able to upvote the responses that you like the most. Good, got a lot of questions or responses coming in. Okay, this is great. I really like all these responses. So one way that I think about this is I have a Google cell phone and I take pictures with it and my pictures go up onto Google Photos. I have no idea where those digital photos are actually stored in a Google data center somewhere in the world, maybe a couple different places. So when I can tell you that CyVerse is located physically in Arizona and in Texas, that's kind of like, pulling back the curtains on the Wizard of Oz. You guys can see that there's actually a physical resource behind that. But when we talk about cloud, you guys are hitting it in the right place, right? So it's this thing that we access over the internet. It's someone else's computer, but it has storage available, it has computing available. And so we're going to be using the cloud for the next 4 days as we work through this workshop material. Okay, so let's go to our next question. So real quick poll, which operating system do you use on your, let's just say your computer for doing science? I'm kind of excited for the day when we use tablets or something, or our cell phones for most of our research, but we're not there yet. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is pretty typical. I think the actual public use of operating systems is 80% Windows. Something like 15% or 19% Mac, and then like 1% Linux. So the fact that we have so many Linux users and so many Mac users already makes us kind of elitist. Oh, you're right. So Chromebook is not an option. I would say, ooh, I should add that to the future one. Chromebooks are running like a Linux kernel, which is actually maybe more like an Android kernel, but maybe we can just say Android for right now if you're running a Chromebook. Cool. Okay. So let's go to our next question. So I understand that this is an introductory course. So, you know, maybe you guys have never heard of Project Jupyter or RStudio, but I suspect that some of you may have. And I left that desktop environment stuff in here from a previous GIS workshop that I did. But for those of you that aren't GIS people, ArcGIS is the most common commercial GIS software, and then those others are open source softwares. Cool. Well, I'm glad to see that most of you guys are using R, because that's where we're going to start out this morning. Okay, let's go to our next question. Okay, so let's see, do I need to clear this? Hold on a second. Actually, wait, are you guys able to answer this one right now? Looks like maybe it's locked. There we go. Oh, I see, it just shows us who's in the lead. So my own personal history with the command line was that I met Eric indirectly, and then I became a client in his advanced cyber infrastructure class as a postdoc, and I sat in on his course. And that's really the place that forced me to use the command line for the first time. I'd used consoles like Python consoles and R consoles in my stats classes and in my GIS work. But I'd never opened like a bash terminal and connected to a high performance computing center until I was a postdoc. And so that was about 7 years ago. So this stuff that I get to teach now, like, is stuff that I picked up after I've essentially completed my normal education process. Cool. Well, it's good to see that we have a very binomial distribution. It looks like we have people that use it a lot and people that have heard about it but may not have used it before. So that's totally okay. Don't be afraid. It's sort of addicting, I think. Once you start to use the command line more often, you start to see how powerful it can be. Okay. Now, last question. This is a little bit of a rehash of the other one, but how much command line experience do you guys have using anything like terminals or R or Python? This should be a pretty similar result to our other one. And we, just speaking for the instructors, we really appreciate you guys giving us this information. So this will help us structure some of the breakout sessions, I think, later today and tomorrow, or excuse me, on Thursday, Friday. Okay, cool. So I'm going to exit out of that now. Let's go back to the project page. So I discussed briefly a few minutes ago, the discovery environment is this workbench that we're going to jump into. There's a big, hideous diagram of all the things that go on the back end that we kind of want to hide from. But for right now, what I want you guys to do is to open a new browser page, and we're going to type in user.cyverse.org. Let's see, am I logged in? It looks like. Let me sign out so I can log back in with you guys. So if you come to user.cyverse.org, what you'll see is a login page. And I'm pretty sure that all of you have signed in to CyVerse and created an account. So we'll go ahead and log in. And when you log in, you arrive in our user portal. So this portal has a lot of options. So many options, I can't even talk about them all in an hour. So really what I want to show you guys right now is that there are services that are available to you. And the service that we're going to use this morning is called the discovery environment. So go ahead and click on the discovery environment and launch it. And you can see in my Mac, it asked me to log in again. And this is taking me to a similar login. So if I log in with my CyVerse ID, I'm actually already logged in. So it drops me directly into the discovery environment. So just by a show of thumbs up, give me a thumbs up here when you are successfully logged into CyVerse and logged into the discovery environment. If you are unsuccessful, I guess you can give us thumbs down. And if you can't find the thumbs up, you can just say in the chat, logged in.
What's your message that you're getting? Refreshes my message.
An unexpected error has occurred. Wonderful.
I'm going to log out and try this again.
I'll go ahead. Let me log out as well and see what happens. Let's see the screenshot.
I made it.
I was able to get in.
Thanks for the screenshot.
Welcome to the joy of doing live workshops.
Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Try refreshing your page.
Yes, same thing happened to me.
Okay.
Try refreshing.
I did.
And you keep getting the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to send this off to our dev team.
Yep. Well, looks like Steven's fine. I don't know what's wrong with everyone else.
Yeah, I don't know. Mine worked. I don't know if it's people who haven't logged in before.
So
or...
yeah, it's possible that if this is your first time logging into CyVerse, it may be generating your user profiles in our backend, and maybe all of us doing it at once got a little angry. So go ahead and refresh it. Steven says he's using a Firefox browser. I use Chrome on my Mac, and it works pretty well. I would suggest perhaps not using Edge or whatever the Microsoft browser is nowadays, Internet Explorer.
But Fox is okay? I mean, Firefox?
Yeah, it should be fine.
Yeah, I'm using Firefox.
Okay.
It's not letting me.
Another option is to click that de.cyverse.org link that Eric shared in the chat.
I don't see it. It's very high up.
Thiago has reported that if you try to log out and then log back in, it seems to clear it. There may be a cookie problem, depending on when it was that you last logged in. And then just could people let me know if this is a problem logging into user.cyverse.org or de.cyverse.org?
Yeah, it is possible that because I had you guys go from user.cyverse.org towards the DE, that new user portal just was launched last week. So it's possible that we're finding a new bug. Huh.
No, not for me. The DE gives me the same answer.
Same, and I've logged out and tried to log back in, but it won't even pull me up to the login screen if I use the DE CyVerse page. But I'm going to try clearing cookies from that page now.
Yeah, no.
Well, I have an idea. We just started, but how about we take a 5-minute break right now? You guys can go grab a fresh coffee, go outside and smell the fresh air for a minute, and then we'll just try to see if we can work through this. If you're still stuck, maybe just take a break and we'll talk to our core software team and maybe we can get them to jump into the call with us. So it's 9:30 for me right now, and we'll have you guys come back at 9:35.
Great. Okay.
I have a different random.
So it's 9:35. I would ask again, can I get a thumbs up for the folks that have successfully logged in? A few more thumbs this time. And can I get thumbs down or sad face for anyone that's still having trouble? Okay, a few people are still working on it. Okay, for the folks that are not able to log in, you're going to be able to follow along with me. And let's hold off on getting you guys fixed. We'll put you into a breakout room at our next scheduled break, and we'll see if we can get you sorted out. But for the sake of the workshop, let's try to move forward. So what I've done so far is I've logged into CyVerse and I've logged into this workbench that we call the discovery environment. And in the discovery environment, this is patterned to look like your desktop. This platform is about 8 or 9 years old now. So the UI will look a little bit dated in some places. We have a new UI that is in development, but we're going to go with the old UI for this workshop. So once I'm logged in, you can see there's these 3 buttons over here on the left. Let me make these a little bit bigger. I can rescale my desktop size here, I believe. So we'll see if these can look a little bigger. So we have data, apps, and analyses. You can see these are sort of like icons on a desktop. In the upper right, we have a help button, which can take you back to our documentation. We have your preferences and group icon for your users, so you can set up your preferences. We have things like teams and communities. And then there's this bell icon. I'm going to go ahead and clear all of my notifications. So your bell should just look as like a little plain bell for notifications. In the bottom right, there is a little chat bot. This is called Intercom. So this is a instant messenger service, so that if you're using the discovery environment and you have a question or you have a problem, you can click on this and then you can chat with one of our staff. So if you talk to us over this during business hours, during the week, generally you'll get a response from us within 10 or 15 minutes. If you do it over the weekend or late at night, we probably won't talk to you till the next Monday. So from here, what I would like you guys to do is to click on the data button. And so this data button will open a window, which looks just like a pop-out window on your desktop. And it says data, there's a navigation pane on one side. And what you see is this classic kind of file browser appearance. So there are folders, and then within the folders, there are subdirectories. And so just to explain this, there is the username folder is the top folder that you'll see. I'm not a great person to look at because I have hundreds of folders now in my user account. Your brand new CyVerse user account probably only has a single folder in it called Analyses. And so you can create new folders in your account by going to the file and then clicking on new folder. So I'm gonna create a new folder right now called AG2PI workshop. And at least in this interface, the case sensitivity brings up capital letters first and then lowercase letters second. So you can see I have my capital letter folders, and then I have this new AG2PI workshop folder that I just created. And so this is a new folder. It's empty. It has nothing inside of it right now, but you can see that I can click on the details button and I can see information about it. I can see that I have ownership over this folder. And so what that means is that I can create and delete objects in here. You also have, within the Linux file system, you have permissions like read only and write permission. So those three read, write, own are the three kind of administrative levels that you can give to files and folders in the data store. And so if I click and I go into this folder, I can see that it's empty. If I wanted to, I could create a new file in here. It can be a text file or an R script, a markdown file, etc. And then I would own that, and it would be private to my username. And so you have files which are generated privately, and then you can share them either with individuals or with groups. So if I click on my username again, and I click on the AG2PI workshop, I can begin sharing this. And if I want to share this, I can search for other users. So if I search for Ryan Bartlemy, I can see Ryan's username comes up, and I can share this folder with him, giving him either read-only access, write access, or own access. And so this is the permissions level that if you wanted to share this anonymously with the internet, I can go to the anonymous public user and share that. Would it be a good option for me? Maybe in the chat, tell me, would you want to give the anonymous internet write permission over a private folder in your user profile? Yes or no? Right. So you don't want to let people randomly on the internet own things that they can edit. One point about this is that I can only access this interface in the DE by having a CyVerse account. So you would at least need to be a CyVerse user to be able to view this folder, to edit it in the discovery environment. There are other ways to connect to this folder using the command line, which we'll get to by the end of today. But this is sort of similar to, I don't want to necessarily say Box or Google Drive, because this is an actual cloud storage. So it's actually much more like an S3 bucket on Amazon. But these data are on spinning disks in CyVerse, and they have very fast read-write access. So you can put large quantities of data in here and then read them down to your local laptop or to your HPC center, or keep them within CyVerse and run them on our cloud services. So we have our individual user profiles. And then the second one is this community data folder. And so within the community data, these are other large scientific projects which have created folders and are sharing data within them. So we have different groups that are doing bioinformatics. We have geospatial data groups. We have NEON. And if we come down here, we can see that, that Ryan has created a folder for this workshop called AG2PI. And so the path within the CyVerse interface is iPlant. So this is our zone within what's called iRods, which is the Integrated Rule-Oriented Decision System, which is the cloud storage service that we use for our data store. So our zone stays as iPlant from our former project name. We have a home directory. The community data are in the shared space. And then we have the AG2PI workshop. And then you can see that there are data in here. Just by a show of thumbs up, who can navigate from the data window to the community data to the AG2PI folder and then see the contents of this? Good. Okay, so most of you are able to see this. And so the reason that you're able to see this is that I believe Ryan added you all as users, but let's click on this and see. So I come down to AG2PI and I click on the share permissions. You can see that Ryan has shared this with only 5 other users. So there's the public user, which is any user inside of CyVerse, and that's why you guys can see this with read-only access. The anonymous user, so the internet can also see this with read-only access. And then you can see that Ryan's added the instructors on here with ownership permissions. So this is a public folder that you can see. There are other projects in the community data on CyVerse that we can't see right now because they haven't been shared with us. So if they haven't been shared with the community user or the anonymous public user, then you don't see them. They're essentially private data. Okay, so underneath this, we have the shared with me folder. So I shared my AG2PI folder with Ryan Bartlemy. So the R Bartlemy user should be able to see that. And if you guys shared that folder back with me, then I would be able to see it. So Ryan has shared with me one folder in the past called shotgun data. Ryan, do you want to go ahead and try to share the AG2PI with me, the T Swetnam user right now? We'll see if it shows up. So you guys could share folders with one another, and an individual user sharing a folder or a file with another individual user will appear under this shared with me space. So all of these usernames that I can see in here are other CyVerse users that have shared folders publicly. I'll stop for a second. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have any questions about this, and you can ask a question right now, or if you'd like, you can type it into the chat.
We shouldn't see the shotgun data, correct?
Right, because Ryan has not shared that folder with you. Because I'm in, so your username, the directory path should be iPlant/home/your username. And so the only reason I can see this shotgun data is because at some point in the past, Ryan shared that folder either with me or with the public user.
Perfect.
Okay, so it looks like Ryan just shared another folder with me. So he shared this sorghum, BAP, VCF, all seasons. So he added me as a user to that permission, and I have read access to that. So I can't edit it, but I can see it. So this is very Linuxy, but the point is that working in cloud, be it on CyVerse or on Amazon Web Services, or if you go to your HPC center and work on their high performance computer or on a high throughput computing system, chances are it's going to be Linux. Something like 99% of cloud services for science use Linux. So we're going to have to become used to these Linux file paths, which for those of you that use Windows, you're used to the C:\\/ as your drive path. On a Linux file system, the drive path is a /. So the root path is a /, and then it follows these other folder architectures. And we kind of explain this a little bit in our documentation here when we talk about using a Windows file path versus a Linux file path. So at this point, I believe I've gone through most of the information about the data store. All right, okay, here we go. So I haven't talked about using third-party clients to connect to the data store. So I think I have to reshare my whole desktop just so you guys can see this. Go to the desktop. Okay, so optionally for the workshop, we suggested that you could get a Cyberduck account. Let's see if I can exit the full screen here. Running dual monitors always messes me up here. There we go. Oh, wait for a second. Okay, so you should be able to see my Cyberduck now. So Cyberduck is a third-party software that can connect to many different file services. So when you open Cyberduck and you go to create a connection, you can connect over HTTP or HTTPS. These are internet protocols, FTP, SFTP. But then you start to see these Windows, Azure, Backblaze, Google Cloud Storage, Amazon S3. So these are other cloud storage providers that you can connect Cyberduck to. Google Drive, Dropbox. But following our documentation, you can go and download a profile for CyVerse and for Cyberduck. And so what I have in here are these profiles that are connected to my CyVerse data store. And so I can connect now. You can see iPlant Home T Sweatnum. So this is the same file path on the CyVerse data store, but now I'm using the Cyberduck client. I can see all of my files and folders, and I can grab these files and drag and drop them from my desktop and upload them into CyVerse or download them back to my local host. Cyberduck is useful for moving files between your computer and the CyVerse data store. It's not useful for moving files between CyVerse and Google Drive, because what it'll do is it'll download it to your laptop and then try to send it back up to Google Drive. So it's a good third-party client for moving files from the computer you're using up into the CyVerse cloud data service. So that's what I wanted to show there. Are there any questions about using platforms like Cyberduck or FileZilla or anything? Okay. So CyVerse is cloud data storage, and we use a platform called iRods to host all that. So in the back behind the curtain, There are many hundreds of computer servers, thousands of hard disks all spinning to make our data store look like it's one computer with one drive. So you have the iPlant zone, the home, and then the shared or your username. What we also have is a service that's just called WebDAV, which can host the data store over an internet client like HTTP and HTTPS. So if you go to the URL, data.cyverse.org, you'll see this screen which says you're now using a WebDAV service. There's a full WebDAV and an anonymous read-only WebDAV. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click on this anonymous read-only WebDAV, and it has now added this dav-anon. So what this is doing is it's looking for any folders in the CyVerse data store which are shared with the anonymous user, which means that it's open on the internet. And if I click on the projects folder, this will take me to the shared file path. So these Astrolabe, BioViz, Cheesehead, these are the same folders that if I come to community data, I see them here. Astrolabe, BioViz, Cheesehead. So these are folders that have data which are shared anonymously on the web. And if I scroll down, I can see the AG2PI workshop. And so I can click on this, and now I can see these same folders that Ryan has uploaded. So if I click on this Solar PDF, it should open the PDF for me. So I'm able to access all of the data on the CyVerse data store now through my browser. This is doing a read inside of the browser, but I could do something like a right click and then save the link as, and then save this PDF back to my laptop. So now what I can do is I can host data on CyVerse that people can use common command line tools like the wget command or the curl command to download data over the HTTPS protocol, which is a little different than, let's say, the S3 protocol or the iRODS iCommands protocols. So you can move files back and forth using conventional browser stuff. Okay. Let's go back. And I can also connect that WebDAV to my CyVerse username. So I'll go ahead and do that. Sorry. So I go to david.cyverse.org. I click on the full WebDAV. And if I click on iPlant home, it's going to ask me for my CyVerse username and password. So I can log in. And then this should take me to my CyVerse username path eventually. Let's try this. So I added my username there to get there. So if you guys were to try to log into my username, it probably won't work because I haven't shared my path with you. So again, the permissions are set at the administrative level through the data store so that you can't access this unless you log in using the correct credentials. So there is some level of security for our data. Okay. Let's see. So at this point, we're ready to talk about the next part of the discovery environment. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the de.cyverse.org tab. And so we've just spent the last 15 minutes talking about the data tab. Now I'm going to talk about this apps tab. So if I click on the apps button, it opens a new window, which shows us apps. And you can see that there's a list of apps that come up. These are apps that I'm developing, but there are public apps. Your apps window probably looks a little bit more vacant than mine does. But we have these categories where I can click on operation, and you can see that they're using an ontology here to organize these different apps. So I haven't kept count, maybe Amanda knows, but there are thousands of apps in CyVerse at this point.
Oh, almost certainly, yeah.
Yeah, maybe even tens of thousands. I don't know if
I don't know if you expect me to have a real number.
Yeah, but there's a lot, right? So we can get lost trying to find the apps that we want to use. So if you're doing genomics research, you can come in here and you can search for your favorite thing, and it might be there for you already. If not, you can bring your own Docker container into this platform and then deploy a tool and an app. And so what we call tools are Docker containers, and what we call apps are these little graphic interfaces which we set up, which I'm about to go over with you. But the advanced part of integrating your own containers is another workshop. This is our introductory workshop. So within the apps window, you can create a new app if you want. If you get really fancy, you can chain together multiple apps to create workflows. But what I want to go over quickly is that underneath the categories in the My Apps, you should see under My Communities an AG2PI community. If you see that, go ahead and click on it. And give me a thumbs up if you're able to see the AG2PI and click on that, and then go to this new window where you can see the Jupyter Lab SciPy notebook and the Rocker RStudio notebook. So these are two apps which we've shared with you guys. And Christina's asked, what is a Docker container? I'm sorry for throwing more cognitive load at you guys, but a container is essentially an operating system with software installed on it that can be run on another computer. And so Docker is the software that runs containers, and it's the most popular container platform right now. And so you can build a recipe for your operating system and the software you want, and then that's the container. Actually, sorry, that's the image. And then you can deploy that image on other platforms. And so what CyVerse is doing for you is orchestrating the deployment of these containers. So we have RStudio Tidyverse image version 3.6.3, which is a container which is in CyVerse. And we can all launch the same copy of this on multiple virtual machines. So in a little bit, Ryan's going to go through this process of launching the RStudio image for you, and you'll have your own computer on the cloud that is running this instance of RStudio with everything inside of it. Okay, so within this apps interface, we have different apps. We've set up this community where we're basically limiting the number of apps you can see to just these two apps that we're going to be using for the workshop. But if you wanted to search for an app, let's search for Jupyter. So if I type in Jupyter in our search window, a whole list of Jupyter apps pop up. So there's a bunch of apps that I've integrated, and then there are other public apps that other users on CyVerse have created. This app right here has a lock icon on it, which means it's a private app. So similar to this read, write, own, you create an app and it's private to you. It's not public until you publish it. And so you can create your own private tools and share them with your friends or with your community before you submit those out for public use on CyVerse. Okay, but within our AG2PI community, if I click on one of these, and I'm gonna, I think, let Ryan go through the launch of this, but it opens the window for the app. And so there are some fields here that we can see the name of the app, the input data folder, and then the resource requirements. But I'll stop there and let Ryan talk about those in a little bit. So these apps can be either command line apps. So it's like, run this program on this input file with these outputs, or they can be interactive, which is what we're doing for this workshop. So I want to launch an RStudio integrated development environment and interact with that tool base in my browser. Or I can launch a Jupyter notebook or a Jupyter Lab, and I want to work with notebooks in my browser. So that's what we call interactive apps. It could also be a remote desktop. So you could run a Linux desktop with a graphic user interface program like QJS or some assembly tool that you have that has its own UI. So those interactive apps are what we call this visual interactive computing environment, or VICE. So we have a bunch of terrible puns for our data science workbench. So for those of you that don't know, a VICE is this thing that goes on a workbench which holds your thing that you're working on. So that's our bad joke. But you have many different tools in CyVerse, but for the purpose of this workshop, we're going to focus down on this AG2PI community. If you're not a member of the AG2PI community, please put that in the chat and we can get you added to that over the break. Okay, I'm going to move on to this third window, which is our analyses window. And so when you launch an app, it will pop up in the analysis window. And currently, I don't have any active apps. These are all canceled or saved and completed. But in a few minutes, you guys will get to launch one of these and you'll get to see the app. When you're running an app, there are options that you see. So you can go to the output folder once the app completes, but you can also view the parameters from which it was launched with. I can actually relaunch a container from here if I want, and then I can view info about that analysis. So there's a bunch of metadata logs which are available here in these little 3 buttons icon on the right side of the analysis folder. So the important ones are going to be completing and saving the app when we're done. So we'll probably do that at the end of today. Or to cancel the app, if something went wrong, you can just cancel it. And then after you're done with all this, you can delete it. So there are different options for that. You can also share your analysis with other users. So you could have 2 or more users pop into an RStudio and look at it, or into a Jupyter Lab and look at it. Let's see, I have a notification in my icon. Oh, I see that Ryan shared the folder with me. So the notification went off when Ryan shared that folder. Okay, let me just check in on my notes. So we've got our apps and our tools. Brief walk through the analyses. So I think at this point, I can take a few questions. We're starting to go over for time, but we did have our little short 5-minute break. So does anyone have any comments or questions about this discovery environment interface, or perhaps the data store, which I've just spent the last 45 minutes talking about? Okay, I'm not going to force you guys to ask questions, but we're at 10:05. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 10:10.
Okay. Recording. So everybody hopefully has had a chance to get on to the data store through the discovery environment. And so just want to like re-familiarize ourselves with what Tyson went through this morning. So feel free to follow along if you can, if you have the capability of doing that, along with looking at the Zoom window while I go through this. So we're going to start off, we're going to go back to the data store, and we're just going to just reorient ourselves with this. So remember, we have our user ID. So this is our private folder with all of the different data that are available. And so I have a number of folders here. These are all able to interact with the apps in the discovery environment, and we're going to sort of end before lunch with combining everything together. So I'd like everybody to go along and make sure that you can give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can get all the way to the community data and then AG2PI_workshop. Cool. Seeing a lot of thumbs up. So in this folder, there will be files for Thursday's lesson on how to use the bash shell, intermixed with some phenomics data that I provided for doing the Friday's lesson on how to plot in RStudio. So let's take a look at some of the phenomics data. So you can, this is going to operate very similarly to like how your desktop computer would work. So we could just double click on the folder or single click, and then it'll take us one folder higher in the hierarchy. And so we'll kind of go over exactly what file hierarchies are and how to structure them on Thursday. That's kind of one of the most useful things that the shell can do for us. But I just wanted to show you that you can also preview your text files in the discovery environment. So now that we're inside the ag-data in the AG2PI workshop folder, we can take a look at, if you're familiar with sequencing data, there is a FASTA file in here. Notice how it says this is not editable, so we don't have write permissions for this file, so this is always going to pop up here. And then we can actually look at the contents of this file. And you see that it says 1 of 87. So this is fitting the text file inside of the window that we have, and we can adjust the page size in kilobytes, and that will expand the amount of text we're able to view. We can also wrap the text or add line numbers to it so that we can spot check files that we have in the discovery environment. So this is pretty useful for if you've uploaded data, you're working on CyVerse, and you really want to make sure that you uploaded the correct file. You can't remember if you forgot to name it something. So this is just ag2pi_demo.fasta, and you can't remember if you had two files that were called the same thing. So it's very useful to preview the different files in here. Some of them are too large to preview. And then if we look here, this is a tabular data set. So this is .text. This is separated with tabs instead of commas. And so the discovery environment will automatically turn this into a table. So you can look at your table and make sure that this is the data set, again, double checking to make sure this is the data set that you want before you even start interacting with any of the apps. You can make sure that you have all the right headers, like date, the cultivar, okay, we've got the canopy height, day of year, everything looks pretty good. And then we can see that we have all of our different variables at the top. And again, the same thing, we have a bunch of different pages because the data store in the discovery environment in the preview mode is allowing us to go in and go through all of the different data sets based on the page size that we've selected. So I clicked the next page. It doesn't move the headers over. So that's something to keep in mind if you're spot checking your tabular data or your CSV files in the data store. It's that only the first page is going to have your headers, but you can also click on this first row header. And you see how, since we're on page 2, it just takes our first row and turns that into the header. We go back to the first page and check first row header. It only works on that first page. So that's something to keep in mind when we're going through this. And you see here, this file is editable. So if you have write access to a folder and a file is labeled as editable, then you are able to edit the contents of the file. But if you just have read access, you're only allowed to look at the contents. of the file. And then if we go back to this home directory, you see we have some other folders in here. We have one that's called data, and inside there's these weird files like amino acids and basilisk and minotaur. So these are all going to be used for the shell exercise. So I've taken some of the materials from the Carpentries organization and adapted them to this format. And so these are some of the files that are referenced in that lesson. So we'll have our own data in the ag-data, and then throughout the shell portion of the workshop, we'll use some of the other folders for that. And so this will be, so this iPlantHome/shared AG2PI workshop will be kind of our input folder for our apps. So let's move on to launching RStudio. I know in the agenda it says that we were going to do that after lunch, but I think Tyson did a really great job of explaining sort of the different ways that you can access the discovery environment. So we have Cyberduck as a means of you taking local files and putting them onto the data store. We have the data store inside of the discovery environment, which we can also upload files from our desktop. We can create new folders. We can add metadata through this interactive interface. And now let's go to the apps. So everybody give me a thumbs up if you are ready for the apps. Cool, seeing some thumbs up. All right, so like Tyson said, so it starts off with your apps under development. So when we click on apps, you can see I have the lock icon. I have a bunch of different apps that are private that I haven't released yet. And now what we want to do is go down to the My Communities, AG2PI. You all should be a member of this. I added your CyVerse user IDs. If you're not on there, you can still, these apps are publicly available and you can still search for them in the search apps icon. So I'll slow down at this point and I'll let everybody try and launch the RStudio app. So I'm just using this as a shortcut to get to the apps that we're going to be using. So Tyson is going to demo the Jupyter Lab this afternoon, and we're going to try launching RStudio. So Jupyter Lab and RStudio are both integrated development environments, or IDEs. And these will let us develop our code in an environment where we can see the plots, we can see the data that we have loaded, we can write it as notebooks in a sort of digestible format. And this is a really good way to develop the code and check things as you go along the way. Instead of trying to write one big program all at once, it's good to break things up into logical chunks that feed into each other. And it really helps to use one of these integrated development environments to do that. So the first app that we're going to launch is this Rocker RStudioverse 3.6.3. So that is the version of R that is running inside of this container. The Rocker group is the organization that made this RStudio instance, and they will periodically release new versions of RStudio and all of these other different flavors of RStudio. Some of them have Python. RStudio is not just a development environment for R. It's expanded a lot in the last few years. You can write C++ code in there. You could write Python. It's even got support for the Julia language. There's a whole lot of different things that you can do in RStudio, and same with Jupyter Lab. So it's kind of one of those things where you try out which one of these apps or environments works for you, like whatever makes the most sense for you when you're writing your analyses and programs. So let's go ahead and click on the three dots. And if we click on App Info, we'll see some details about it. So the published on date is not correct. That's something that we're working on, but we can go down here. We can see that the topic of this app is informatics. There's this quick launch button. So that's this right here. There's some information about the tool. So this is describing it, the version, and then the documentation. So there's the quick start, there's the training data set, and the references. So every app will have this associated with it. And it'll depend on who integrated it, how much information is included. So if we want to, can click on that. And we can go to, click on the three dots and go to quick launch. And then if we click on this right here, say use this quick launch. And that'll bring up this app window. So what we want to do is give our analysis a name. By default, it's going to tell you what the container is and then append analysis and a number. So probably want to name our analysis something like AG2PI _ day 1 _ demo. And make this larger. So now we have comments. You can say, this is a demo of Vice and the DE. Now we have this option of selecting the output folder. So if we, by default, this is going to put it to the iPlant home and then your username and analyses. This is fine for our purposes today. And then we have this option of retain inputs. So this will copy your input files into your output. So notice here, we're going to leave that unchecked. So now let's move to the input data. Notice there's these parentheses right here that say not required. That means that this is an interactive app or a command line app that doesn't require any input data. So we have the option of selecting a folder or a file. And so if we go, or we can add multiple files individually right here. So if we go here to browse, now we can go, you see the discovery environment data store pops up and we can now search through. So we've taken all this time. So if you think about this in the context of your own analyses, you've uploaded your files or folders, they're in the data store, and now we have the option of interacting with them. And this is kind of where Vice comes into its own compared to running Docker in the command line. So running Docker in the command line can be a bit of a headache when you're starting off. So this has a nice user interface that allows us to browse for our files without having to learn some complex code to get those files to interact with these containers. So that's all running in the back end. So we can go and click on the little arrow right here, and that will collapse your personal folder. And then we can click on the community data. And click on the arrow next to that. And now we can scroll down and we can find the AG2PI workshop data. So now if we select that, so right now it says the selected folder is AG2PI_workshop. And we can see what the path is in the data store for that. So it's this iPlant home shared AG2PI workshop. So now if we click OK, that will input this full path for that folder there. If we instead clicked on ag data, it's only going to input the contents of the ag data folder and nothing in the folder that contains ag data. And we'll talk about on Thursday in using the shell what this means in a little bit more detail. But for now, let's go back and select this AG2PI workshop folder. Hit OK. And now down here, there's this button that's slightly obscured by the chat. It says Launch Analysis. So if we click on that, we'll now see this message that says it's successfully launched. And you'll get some notifications that pop up here. And so now if we go to, we can look at this in two ways. We can look at our analyses that have been submitted through the notifications and the bell in the upper right-hand corner, or we can go to the analyses. See, I have these ones that are currently running, so I'll just stop running those. Okay. And so now you see that we've launched our app in the discovery environment. And there's this little arrow pointing to the right-hand corner. If we click that, it will bring us to this page, which will say loading Vice analysis, Kubernetes deployment created, the service created, Ingress created, pod phase pending. So this is the URL that our app is going to run in. And so it'll be like this before changing to the RStudio interface. And this is now where Tyson mentioned the Docker container before. So this is where we've told Vice to take a container and deploy it for us. And we're using this Kubernetes, which you don't really need to know what it is, but that is what sort of makes it so that we can run all of these different apps on CyVerse Vice in the discovery environment. Is everybody gotten to this pod phase pending? Give me a thumbs down if you have not been able to get to this pod phase pending. Or raise your hand in the meeting so that'll persist so somebody can help you.
And if anyone doesn't have access to Vice, please just type your CyVerse username in the chat and we'll get you added. Most workshop attendees should have had that ahead of time, and if not, we will make it happen.
raise your hand if you still are not able to get to the Kubernetes pod phase pending, which would be okay. So now mine has started. If you are able to see what I'm seeing, put your thumbs up. If you're still waiting for the pod phase or you get an error, please raise your hand, and we'll just make sure that we're not sort of hitting the server too hard all at once, since there's quite a few of us in the workshop. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Don't see any raised hands. Awesome. So you see this is now a different URL here. It's this alphanumeric letters and numbers .cyverse.run. So this is the redirect from the discovery environment. So when we go to our analyses and it says status is running, it has the start date. This is the link that will take, this little arrow is the link that'll take us to this URL. So in here we have the RStudio integrated development environment. And so if you look down in the lower right-hand corner down here, you'll notice that our input folder AG2PI _ workshop is here. And we can actually click on that and we'll see that all of the files that were in that community folder are now inside of our RStudio instance. So this is great. So we'll end up using this workflow that I just discussed for the duration of Thursday and Friday. So if there's one thing to take like notes on, it would be the process of starting the app, adding the input folder, and getting to this point. So once we're here, we'll be able to do all of the hands-on exercises for Thursday and Friday. So go over quickly a little bit of kind of what is all here in RStudio, and then we'll do a little bit of a refresher of this on Friday. So has anybody not been able to get to this point? Please throw up a hand. Raise a hand. Or mention it in the chat and somebody from CyVerse will come to help you. See that Amon has, somebody is going to work with you on getting Vice access. Yes, so if you are just getting to the chat now, kind of hides it when you're sharing the screen. So if you had trouble following along with this today, I will try and post the recording of this so that you can try it out either tonight or tomorrow. so that you're a little familiar with how this works. So I'll exit this and I'll just go through the launching again. If you're at this point, just keep your RStudio environment going. I'm going to stop my screen, or stop my RStudio container and save the outputs, and then go through it again for people to follow along with. So if you have gotten to this screen, please don't do what I'm about to do. So now if I want to relaunch this, I can click on the, since I'm not really changing anything, and go to this relaunch, and I'll be prompted with the analysis again. So it'll default back to the analysis name. So if you're at this point, we will be at the same step. So if you have gotten to the app, RStudio, Rocker RStudio verse 3.6.3. So we can rename our analysis when we're in the launch analysis window. AG2PI _workshop demo. I'll just call this one demo 2. So some people had questions in the chat about this. So we're going to leave this. So this is where all of your analyses will go. What we want to change are the input data, which are not required, but we will be using this method for getting the input data into our RStudio for the remainder of the workshop. So if yours is still running, that's fine. I'm going through this just one more time for people that are just now getting around to this part. So we're going to select the input. You see, since I relaunched this, it automatically put the same input folder in there. So let me just browse, and we'll just, so if you go click on browse, yours should not be populated if this is the first time that you're getting to this point. And then we're going to select this AG2PI workshop, which is inside the community data folder. And Meg has put the full path in the chat as well. And so we'll just hit OK. And then we'll launch the analysis. So now, if I refresh my analyses page, let's close this. Bring up the analysis again. So now I have this listed as running, the AG2PI workshop demo 2. So if your screen is behaving like mine, where you keep hitting refresh and you're not seeing the launched app despite getting the notification, you can just close the window and then reopen the analyses window. Now we go to analysis. And now mine is listed in the pod phase pending. Could you please, Mandeep, could you please put your CyVerse username in the chat, and then I'll make sure to add you to the read permissions for the folder. Thank you. Okay, you should have read access now, Mandeep. Yeah, it is okay that your analysis is running, Cora. So this will be where we end up doing most of the workshop inside this RStudio environment. So that's why I'm kind of going over this, and the analysis is still running. And then we're going to do a little bit more exploration after lunch on sort of just getting our feet wet with how to use the RStudio app on the discovery environment. Is anyone else stuck at this step right now, the pod phase pending? Raise your hand if you're stuck here. So sometimes if you're stuck on this page, if you close the tab and then go back to the analyses and click again on the go to analysis, sometimes it'll have refreshed. If the server is really busy, it will. Once you see this, the waiting for an app to respond, now it's to the point where the container is about to be deployed onto Vice. And now you should have this. Are you still stuck, Miranda? The hand up. Okay, I see one hand up. Is everybody else able to get to this point where we have the RStudio environment running on Vice? Okay, so I think that those of you that have not been able to get to this point are being helped by CyVerse employees. Please raise your hand right now if you haven't got to this point or having issues, and then we'll send you to get some help. If you're able to launch RStudio, but you don't get the Vice like pending loading screen, that's fine. That just means the server is working faster than before. So if you're paused at this screen, just click on one of these squares right here, these analyses, and then it should launch the window that contains this. So for everybody else who is at this point, I'll just do a brief overview of this, and we'll be going over this again on Friday. So if you're getting help to get to this point, don't worry about this. We'll go over this again on Friday, first thing in the morning, just to reiterate that. So you see in the RStudio app, there's all these different menus and things like that. And so we have these tabs for terminal and jobs and the console. So we'll be interacting with the terminal first on Thursday. So that'll be the first thing that we do. And so we'll go over some of the terminal commands right away on Thursday morning, sort of what this is and what we can do with it. So this is us accessing bash, the bash shell, inside of RStudio, which is really nice and convenient. So learning this, the bash shell, and using RStudio for writing R code will be kind of a relatively seamless integration. So it's nice to learn it this way. And then everything that you learn in the terminal here will be applicable to other terminals elsewhere. And so I'm a big fan of using RStudio for my development. It's mostly because this is the first IDE or integrated development environment that I learned, but I keep learning new features about it over time. And they keep adding interesting and cool new features to RStudio on the whole for support for other languages. So this little icon right here will let us create new programming scripts or notebooks. So you can see that there's language support for just writing text files, the C++ programming language. You can also write Python code in here, SQL or SQL for database queries, and STAN, which is a statistical programming extension, D3, which does interactive visualization, and all these different flavors of R for doing web stuff, presentation, documentation, creating R scripts and notebooks, and R Markdown or Shiny web apps. So you don't really need to know what all of those things are. The point of me showing you this is the RStudio development environment isn't just for R. So if you're a Python programmer and you're curious about using RStudio for developing your Python code, it does have that support in here for writing Python code. And there's, so if we can look at the drop-down menus. So we've got open file, new file is the same thing as this right here. So we can do new file, new R script if we wanted to make an R script. And that'll open a new pane. And so then if we also wanted to write some Python code, you can open a Python script as well. And you see that the icons change here. And so every time you create a new programming script or notebook, it'll pop up in this pane right here. And then when I close that out, it'll make the terminal and the R console nice and large again. And so I think that's pretty much where I wanted to get to with this today. So we can start to think about how these files are going to look after lunch. And so we'll kind of explore this down here where we have the AG2PI workshop folder, and we'll compare that to what we have in the data store just to make sure that everything is there visually. And then Tyson will, after we sort of play around a little bit more in RStudio, Tyson will go through how to launch the Jupyter Lab on the discovery environment, which is another integrated development environment that's very popular with data science. And so kind of knowing how to access both of these on CyVerse will help when you're deciding what you would like to do after the workshop. So when you start to work with your own data in whatever capacity, you put it on the data store, and then you can decide what works best for you, or if you already have experience with the Jupyter Lab environment, you can launch that application instead of RStudio, or if you like RStudio, you can use that as well. So all of these things are freely available on CyVerse. And with that, I will stop.
My God, we're actually on time.
Yeah. So to answer Luigi, there is a tutorial for RStudio and the Jupyter Lab. The RStudio tutorial, I'll be going over this again on Friday when we get around to programming. It's introducing R and RStudio on the Read the Docs page. So let me just quick paste where that is so you can. So that is the RStudio tutorial. And if you don't have the AG2PI workshop folder, it means that it wasn't selected as an input when you launched the container, but that's okay, because when we do go through the shell exercise on Thursday, we're going to walk through this again, so that we'll do this enough times so that by the end of the workshop series, everybody should be familiar with launching this, interacting with the folders, and then we'll have the opportunity for people to sort of play around with RStudio at the end of the workshop and have us around to ask questions. So this is meant to be a sort of starting place of introducing you to CyVerse, introducing you to the command line, showing you how to do importing the data and then plotting it in R. Because that, I think when I started, so I started as a bench scientist, and I had no programming experience before grad school. And then I started to do a lot more in R and RStudio and do some of my visualizations and statistics in there. And then that sort of led me to the point where I'm at now, where I'm sort of instructing people on how to use this and doing the workshop facilitation. So I'm not explicitly a programmer. I started off as a laboratory biologist and now am a trainer for data science. So I think with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll pause the recording, and then we can get to our early lunch / brunch / whatever snack meal time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And if you still have issues with CyVerse and the discovery environment, please let us know in the chat and somebody will help you. And we'll be breaking for an hour. So we'll be back at 2 minutes after the hour, wherever you are. So for us in Arizona, that will be 12. We'll be back at 12:02 p.m.
So I'm going to hang out right now for a few minutes. If anyone wants to chat about.
Okay, so it's 2 after the hour. That's an hour break. So we'll get started again. So let me share my screen. So we're gonna do a little bit more with what we started this morning before we took our hour break. So hopefully everybody got to this point. If not, we're gonna go over this one more time, just so that everybody is sure how to launch the RStudio app on the discovery, on Vice, on the discovery environment, so that we'll be able to do Thursday and Friday's workshop. And I'll try and get the recording of this, of today, posted sometime tomorrow, so that people can go over this for Thursday and Friday. So then we won't have to spend as much time making sure that everybody has their apps running on CyVerse. So I'm going to close this RStudio tab, and we're going to go over what to do when you're done with the analysis. So there's the 3 dots in the analyses window right here next to it. The status is running. So there's this hourglass here where if we were running an analysis and we needed more time, say we're running a big statistical calculation in R and we know it's going to take a while, you can click on here and then it'll say this analysis is scheduled to be terminated on, and then the date. Do you wish to extend the time limit? If you hit OK, it'll ask the CyVerse discovery environment team to extend your analysis. But we won't do that just now, but that's just for future reference. So I hit cancel. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at how what is the best way to complete an analysis? So we have all of these options for running analysis right here. So there's the go to output folder, which will take us to the output folder in the data store. There's the view logs, which will tell us any errors from the server running the app. View parameters will let us know what our input, output, and app were. Relaunch will bring up the app launch window where where you could relaunch this analysis. If we click on view analysis info, it'll tell us some more metadata or data about our data of the analysis. We can share our analysis with other people with the share with collaborators. But these last few ones are most pertinent or important for you, the user. So there's this option, complete and save outputs. There's an option called cancel. There's an option rename, and then you can add some comments. So what we want to do is click complete and save outputs. If we click cancel, nothing will be saved from the analysis that we ran. So I've only ever used cancel in the instance where I start up an app, and then I realize that that's not the app that I want. So this is more of a before you get started sort of tool. And this is what we really want to use when we're stopping our analyses. So I'm just gonna go, you can all go ahead and we'll just go through and click on complete and save outputs. And then you should get a message saying that your analysis has stopped. So this is completed. And so now we can go to the output folder, which will be by default in your username and analyses folder. So I didn't create, let's see. Let's go sort by last modified. So we can look at this.
And Ryan, one comment is that the analyses was just canceled. And so in the back end of CyVerse, it's taking that container down and copying the files to the data store. And depending on the load on the data store, it can take a few minutes. So, and sometimes even up to like 30 minutes or an hour if you're copying a large amount of data back to.
Could somebody help Rafi with that error? It says failed to retrieve folder contents from the save and complete outputs.
I think in that example, it's not done yet. So he's just canceled the analysis. And so it's still writing the contents. So for example, Ryan, that's the one you just canceled.
It's a save and completed.
Yeah. And the one that Ryan's just canceled, I don't believe I see the AG2PI workshop folder in there yet. And that's probably because it's still being written.
I did not check the box saying that the input folder would be written to the output, right? So we can do this again where we do write that out. So let's go. So generally you'll have whatever your outputs are. If you've written a file outside of your program. Yes, so just like Tyson said, if your folder is empty, the data store is currently trying to populate it with the information, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. This is mostly just to show you where to look. And if you called your output directory something that was not this path right here, like your username / analyses, it will be wherever that output was. So we can go back to our Analyses tab. Minimize this. You can look at View Parameters, and it will tell you your input folders. And if we go to View Analysis Info, that'll tell you that the app is over. And then go to Output Folder. Should take you to the folder if it has been created yet. If it hasn't been created yet, don't worry too much about that. So we will end up going through this process one more time, just to sort of solidify how we're going to be launching this app, what the input folders are going to be. And this will be something that we use, again, Thursday and Friday. So let's just start. Close all this. And then we'll go to the apps again. And let's try this time, let's try searching for it. So we're going to search for Rocker, Rstudio. This is case sensitive. Okay, we're going to select this one that is Rocker Rstudio Verse. And now you can select it. So this is a little bit different than how we did it before. So we found this by typing Rocker, capital R, capital S, lowercase t. And then this Rocker Rstudio Verse 3.6.3 is what we're going to be using. So if you click on it, the highlight happens around the app. And now we can go up to this tab that says Apps. And we go Use App. And that will take us to this app window. So now we're back to naming the analysis. So let's try this. We'll name this AG2PI app search test with underscores. So we use underscores instead of spaces for this. Leave the output folder as it is, but let's check this box right here that says retain inputs ? Enabling this flag will copy all of the input files to the analysis results folder. So let's just click that. And now let's go and add some input data to this app. And then since the last folder I used was the AG2PI workshop folder, that's the one that's selected, but I'll just start over. So we'll go into community data, click on the arrow to expand it, and then we can scroll down, or we can look in this window here, whatever is clearer for you. And then we'll select this AG2PI workshop folder, hit OK. And then the input folder path in the input data pane will be this path right here. iPlant home shared AG2PI workshop. And we'll put that in the input folder menu. So now we can click on the launch analysis again. and it will tell us that our job is submitted. You can see here the last one that I ran is marked as completed because I hit the save and complete output. So if I go to the Analyses tab, you can see that the status right here is submitted. The status is not running. So this is where you get the pod phase pending messages, like when the status is submitted. So you can hit refresh. And then eventually it will list the job as running, and then RStudio will be running again. Was everybody able to find the app using the search function and launch it and get to this point where their analysis is submitted? Give me a thumbs up if you can.
Ryan, while we're waiting, can you show Mandeep where the output for the completed analysis went?
Yeah, so the output for the completed analysis will be in your user ID folder. And then by default, it should be in the Analyses folder. And then I have a lot of output folders in here, so I'm just going to sort these from my first to last. So this is my output folder. So it'll whatever you named your analysis, it'll append the date and time that you saved and completed the analysis to that name. And then that will be the output folder. And then that should be populated with the RStudio outputs as well as the Kitematic, and then the log files from the Kubernetes, and then anything that you've written out in the program. So when we do this on Friday, we'll go through this one more time, and we're actually going to write out files. So it'll be a little more informative on Friday when we go through this again, where we're going to save. Not only are we going to save like some tabular data or some spreadsheet data, we're going to also save some plots that we've created. So it'll make a little more sense when you can see files that you've created appear in the output. Because right now this is just outputting the sort of the base contents of running RStudio. So now I just got a notification that my analysis is running. So let's go back to that folder, or to the analysis window. And I'm back to the RStudio environment with the AG2PI workshop. And then I think this URL changed for me. It may not have. But regardless, so I still have all of this data and everything in here. But now, since I've launched this with the save inputs, when I save all of my outputs, the input folder will also appear in that directory where all of the analysis output goes. So it's kind of nice, particularly like if you're doing like data cleaning or something like that, where you have a large amount of raw spreadsheet data and you're working with it in Jupyter Lab or RStudio. Like say you've collected a bunch of data from some experiments and you're like, okay, well, there's NA values for this because the sensor broke. I need to get rid of this. And I want to visualize this with R. You should be able to look and compare the two documents when you have like the save input. So that's a good use case for like saving the input versus just the output. Okay, so is everybody been able to relaunch this or launch it for the first time if you're joining us this afternoon? Just give a thumbs up in the chat. Cool, seeing lots of thumbs up. Christine, we were launching a new one, but it's exactly the same as what we did for the old one, except instead of using the AG2PI community, we searched for the app in the discovery environment in Vice before launching it. But otherwise, everything is exactly the same. We're just running the same RStudio container with the same input folder. This time I checked that the input folder would be saved with the outputs. So I'm just going over this for another time just to make sure that everybody's comfortable with this, because this will be how we start Thursday and Friday. So once we start doing it, I'll go over the launching the app every time when we start the day on Thursday and Friday, but I'm just going to go through it a little bit quicker than I am today. So today was designed to really slow down and take the time with getting things working on Vice, making sure that we all could get on Vice, and then Thursday and Friday is going to be, now we're going to use it to do some cool stuff and hopefully learn some new things that people don't know about the shell or about R programming and plotting with ggplot2. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I have a question, but go ahead.
Once you're in this mode, is there a way to change your output folder when you're in this view in case you didn't do it right?
So the files will write to the analysis folder. Maybe Ryan, can you go back to the DE and let's see if we can change the output folder? So if you click on the three dots,
yeah,
you can go, that's going to be the predicted output folder. So no, I guess you can't change where it's going to write it after it's launched. And this is only after the analysis completes and it writes back to the data store. So if there's data you wanted to bring into the container, you can still bring data into the running analysis.
Okay.
It just gets a little more complex when you're bringing the data into the analysis with some command line tools that Tyson will kind of briefly go over of how to like work with data remotely in the cloud, but we might end up covering that after we do the shell on Friday. We'll see if we have time for that. Since
The first time I screwed up on the output, and when I click those three dots, there's only two input folder things, one that has an input that says something, and then another one that just says input with nothing, and there's no output listed. But I think the second time I did it,
so if you accidentally close the RStudio window, if you go to the analysis window, if you just click on this go to analysis right here, this little square, that'll reopen the tab with the RStudio instance running.
And also the bell icon, it should be there.
Yeah, access your running analysis here.
And also Ryan can close his Chrome browser right now, and it won't affect anything in the CyVerse discovery environment or on your running instance in RStudio. So this is the great thing about this is you can lose your connection. You could leave work and drive home and then open this again and check on your analysis. Not that we want to upset your work-life balance any more than we already have.
Well, and I think this comes into like on some of the stuff that Tyson and I have, some of the research projects that Tyson and I have worked together on. It comes in handy when you're doing things that you know are going to take a long time. Like doing Bayesian statistics can take a really long time when you're running those analyses on a large amount of data. So it's a nice thing to sort of set up, go to bed, wake up at the beginning of the next day, and then check and see if it did the thing or if you have some error messages that you need to debug the following day, which is definitely something that I personally like a lot about using CyVerse. I mean, even though I'm a CyVerse employee now, I started off as a user before I became an employee. And that was something when I was a user that I was particularly fond of, was the ability to close out a CyVerse. If I have a calculation that's running, it's awesome. You get a little email notification if your calculation or your container or your app is about close to the deadline. It'll say that like your analysis will stop in X at this time on this day, and then you can go back in and request more time for it.
Ryan, is your analysis still submitted, or is it's running now, isn't it? So if you refresh that screen, it should be, yeah.
Now it's running.
Yeah, there's some HTML things going on with the discovery environment in the back end where it's just like a statically loaded web page. So sometimes things don't update.
Yeah, so the refresh tab is your friend in here, the refresh button rather. Sometimes too, it'll get stuck where it'll only show the last app that you launched, and then you can just close that. Oh, excuse me. Close the analysis window and then open it again, and then it'll show your entire history of analyses on Vice. Did everybody get to this point? Please raise your hand if you have not at least done this once. I don't know what that means, Tyson. I don't know what that react means. Okay, so If everybody is at this point, I'm going to close this window. And I'm going to complete and save the outputs and then wait for my output folder to be written. One thing to be aware of too when you're using this is that when you have a running analysis, you can't have more than one browser window accessing the analysis. It will disconnect from one browser window and then connect to the newest one. So if you keep opening RStudio in browser tab after browser tab after browser tab, it will keep disconnecting from your session on Vice and opening a new session in the new window. So it's good to just have like one window open. I mean, sometimes you forget, but if you ever get that disconnect error, a lot of the, like 9 times out of 10, it's because you've opened another tab somewhere or opened another window with the same analysis. It's happened to me a bunch of times doing stuff. And then just remember like which is the newest one, and you'll be fine. You'll be right back to where you were. You're not going to really lose any of your progress. And this is just a reminder, I'm going to copy what Tina shared in the chat. Or if Tina could resend that in the chat. We have a form for feedback on this morning about things you liked, things that you didn't like, any suggestions on how we might be able to do this a little bit better in the future. Thank you, Tina. So please take a minute to give some feedback on this morning's session. So this is not counting anything after lunch. We'll put that all in at the end of the day. We'll have another one of these quick surveys to fill out at the end of today. Okay, and then one last time, I'm going to just go back into the data store through the data tab. I'm going to go to my user ID, which is R Bartlemy. And I'm going to go into the analysis folder, which is where my output went from this. And then I will make this so that I can view the very last one. And so now when I go in here, if this has been updated, since I check that box that says save inputs, now the AG2PI _ workshop folder is available with all of the different files in it. So that's in the app launch window. So if you want to save the inputs, you just check the box underneath it. That is a really good question, Shuyu. So they asked, as soon as you choose complete and save output, it is complete in the analysis window. Is it really completed, or is it still running the analysis in the background? So that's a really good question. When you tell it to save and complete, Vice will close it. And if you're not finished with your analysis, it will just stop whenever it receives the command. So if you're in the middle of a large calculation, I'll throw Bayesian statistics out there as an example, since that's something that I do pretty regularly. So if I was in the middle of doing a large calculation that takes 4 hours and I hit the save and complete outputs, I wouldn't necessarily have the outputs. And I also wouldn't necessarily have things that were just stored as variables in the program unless I was explicitly telling the program that I wanted that data written out in some way. And there are some little tricks that we can go through of getting back variables from RStudio on Friday. When we save our outputs, we can kind of go back and look and see through that. But by and large, it's just good practice to make sure that you're writing your outputs out to the working directory, which we'll go over what that is on Thursday. And then that'll end up saved in their analysis output folder. So it's a really good question. Yeah, and you will receive emails. That's another notification with CyVerse. You will get emails saying that your job is completed, just the same as that you will say that you will get an email saying that your job is about to like run out of time. Christine asks, what did R do to the data? What type of work was done on the data for the job? So we didn't actually do anything with R on the data itself. All we did was tell Vice that we wanted the input folder to go into our container environment, which in this case is RStudio. And you'll see in a bit this afternoon when Tyson does the Jupyter Lab that we can do the same thing with a different integrated development environment, where we put in our input folder and then we save our analysis output, and it'll end up there if we so choose. So when we do things with a programming language like Python or R, we have to tell the computer. So for all intents and purposes, the app is a computer that's running in the cloud, like a computer that has the resources that CyVerse can give it to run. So if you think about it like your computer has a processor, it has RAM, and it has like a video capacity. All of those things are being bundled up and pushed to the cloud where it's running virtually for you. And just the same as if like you were on your own computer, if you don't explicitly tell like your computer that you want to process the data with a programming language like R or Python, it's not going to do any work on it. It's just it's just storing it on the computer. So we didn't do it, to answer your question, Christine, we didn't do anything with it yet. So we'll get to some of that on Thursday when we start to look through the shell, view files, search for files without using the mouse to navigate through the folders. And then on Friday, we'll go through some data cleaning, some data filtering, and writing out that filtered data as a file. And then we'll plot some of the data, and we'll write out those image files. So that I think that'll start to really coalesce and make a lot more sense when we're actually acting with it. So this exercise was mostly just to get everybody familiar with how to use the tools that we have on the visual interactive computing environment on CyVerse. Great questions, everybody. Does anybody have any other questions? If not, I think that we could take our 10-minute break a little bit early. We'll take it now, and then we'll come back at 10 minutes to the hour, and then Tyson will go through launching another app, which is the Jupyter Lab integrated development environment. And then we'll wrap up with some data management, which will go through some of the questions that people had about like how do you get data in and out of the apps, and sort of how do you move everything around. So I'll pause the recording and give everybody a 10-minute break. And I just want to emphasize why it is that we are learning about these apps, the Vice resources, and the different inputs and outputs. So the number one reason why this is useful is that if you try to run some of these analyses on your local laptop or local computer, sometimes it gets really hard to do anything else on your computer. I did that through all of grad school until I had HPC access in like the last year and a half of my PhD. Once I had access to the high performance cluster, it was a lot easier to offload tasks that would take my computer literally 5 hours to do some things sometimes. So we are really providing this, as Tyson had mentioned in the chat about the storage. This is a service for you as scientists to be able to put together your own inputs for an analysis that's a little bit too big to run on your local computer. Or if you just like working on CyVerse to do your analyses, and because then you can not have to worry about installing all of the different R packages to run the Tidyverse ecosystem. That's a perfectly reasonable use case for that as well. So we're really here to help you get your data onto CyVerse to also not only scale, but make it reproducible and make it easy to collaborate with other researchers. So if you think about like a big phenomics project, that's why we're all here, right? Like this is we generate lots of data doing phenomics. It doesn't matter if you're working with plants or you're working with animals. There's a huge amount of data to be synthesized, and it's really great if you could use something like CyVerse as like a home where all the people that you're collaborating with, potentially at other universities as well, you can put that together, create your own, share your data with each other, and then you can create your own sort of analysis ecosystem inside of CyVerse. And then it's also very reproducible, right? Because we have these apps that we're hosting our stuff on. And if you're taking your tabular data that you're generating from these studies, or your sequencing data, and you're putting it on here, and you're using our apps to do it, it will be there, and somebody else can go and rerun your analysis. So it really helps with reproducibility, scalability, and collaboration. And with that, I will turn it over to Tyson, where he'll go over the other development environment that we have in Vice, which is Jupyter Lab.
Can you give me permission to share my screen?
You should be good now.
Okay, so if we go to the agenda, there's a link here in the day one agenda for launching a Jupyter Lab. So we're going to do the same steps that you've done for launching the RStudio. We go to the DE. Oops, let's just do this. Close my windows here. So under the AG2PI community, there is another app in there called Jupyter Lab SciPy. So we're not going to add any new data to this when we launch it. We're going to do another step after we've got this going, but you can change your analysis name if you like, leave the output folder alone, and then don't add any data. Ryan, I missed it earlier, but did you talk about the resource requirements and how you can set those?
I did not, so that would be good to go over as well.
So you can come to every one of these apps and you can specify the minimum number of cores that your app needs. I believe with our orchestration platform, it gives you 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM by default. But as Ryan was saying, if you're doing a really large analysis, you can scale this up with more RAM. So this particular app is set up so that it maxes at 16 and 64 gigs of RAM. We can build tools for you that go up to 64 or 128 threads and 256 or 512 gigs of RAM. So you can basically launch a workstation class virtual machine using this platform. So I'm going to set this at just 2 and 8. You don't have to set these normally. They'll default to some relatively decent level. And then similarly, if you're moving a large amount of data into your folder, you might want to set the minimum disk space as larger so that when the system provisions it, it'll put you on a node with enough disk to do your analysis. So go ahead and press the Launch Analyses button and launch your Jupyter Lab SciPy. And give us a thumbs up when you've got that launched and it's giving you the notification that it's submitted. Yeah, I'll go ahead and repeat the steps again. So click on the apps window and the apps window will open and you can go to the My Communities AG2PI. And then in there should be an app called Jupyter Lab SciPy. And you can either click on the hyperlinked name and it'll open the app and then you can just launch the analysis. Or if you select it, you can click on apps and then use the app and then launch the analysis. And then once the analysis is submitted, you'll see a notification that says it's submitted. And then after a moment, it will give you a notification that it's running and you'll have a hyperlink here to access the URL. The other way that you can access the running analysis is by clicking on the Analyses button. And it should show up here as running or submitted. And then you can click on the square with the arrow that says Go to Analysis. It looks like mine still is getting going. I'm going to shut down my rocker. So I just canceled that RStudio analysis for anyone that's watching. You'll see that it cancels and it dies. I'm gonna launch another one. So I should have 2 of them now. I wonder if our Vice cluster is getting busy. Has anyone been able to enter the Jupyter Lab? Has it started up? Okay, so Raman's in. A few people are in. That's good. At least it's working for you. There we go. Yeah, so I had this other one that it's this one that I launched a little while ago. It's hung, so I'm gonna go ahead and cancel that one. But I have a new fresh one that's working. Okay, there's a few people that are still stuck. So for those of you that can see my screen, what happens after you click on the Go to Analysis tab is that a new URL opens. Everyone's URL is unique. This first 9 or 10 digit number is a unique number for each virtual machine that is just randomly generated. And then this is the Jupyter Lab user interface. Some of you have probably worked with Jupyter notebooks before. And so those of you that are more comfortable in notebooks, the lab is a level up from the classic notebook viewer. And you can actually access the classic notebook viewer by just going to the Launch Classic Notebook. And then if you're familiar with this user interface, it'll open this for you. So the lab does both of these things, which is why we like to use it. But for today, we're going to be using this lab interface. And so a little bit different than RStudio. There's a different layout. This particular SciPy notebook is built from the base Jupyter Lab container. We've added some CyVerse tools for the data store, but otherwise it's just the basic SciPy notebook that you get from Project Jupyter. It comes with a single language in it, Python 3. Their data science notebook comes with Julia and R, which are the other programming languages which make up the acronym name Jupyter. So Julia, Python, and R were the inspiration for the name of Jupyter. And so you can see we can launch a notebook. So this will create a new IPython notebook, and we just see a blank screen here. If I go back to I press the plus button here, and that'll keep the launcher icon open. So there's a plus up here in the upper left, which will reopen the launcher button. You can do cool things like move the launchers around. I can open multiple notebooks and then kind of space them out so that everything fits kind of to one side of the interface. So this is kind of a nice little plastic UI that you can use to move around and do different things. I'll go ahead and cancel that one. But there are widgets on this side where you can come and you can see your running analyses. You can use Git version control, and we're not going to cover it too much today, but maybe on Friday. You can connect to any GitHub repository on the internet and bring their Jupyter notebooks in here and work on them. So similar read-only interfaces, you can download notebooks and run them here in the lab. But what I wanted to show you guys is this option here from the launcher. So you press on the plus button. And actually, maybe I'll pause for just another second. Can I get some thumbs down for all the people that are still waiting on their Vice container to go? And if you want, you can give me a thumbs up to let me know that you're ready. Okay, a few people are still waiting. Okay, it looks like we're going to be still waiting. So go ahead and I'll back up and pause for a minute. So in your discovery environment, go ahead and open your analyses tab, and it'll open the analyses window. Refresh, and then click on the Go to Analysis button, and that should bring you to that Kubernetes loading screen, and we'll see if we're waiting. And I apologize for making you guys wait. Okay, so I guess while we're waiting, I'll go back to our, let's see. I'm going to try to explain some of how this is working. So under the managing data in the cloud tab, we have a little graphic here. And so what this graphic is trying to show us is that you can connect to this CyVerse discovery environment and run your Jupyter or your R or your desktop from a Windows computer, a Mac, or a Linux laptop. And these connect through your browser using the HTTP protocol. There are other file sharing systems on the internet that you're probably familiar with, like Google Drive. But there are also other ones like Google Cloud. And then you have things like Box. And so these are cloud storage services that you access mostly through your browser. We can use third-party clients like Cyberduck to connect to these. But accessing large amounts of cloud native data is actually throttled by doing it over the HTTP protocol. So your browser is not designed to handle really large files or to move a lot of data. And so the way that we get around this is that we use other types of protocols like S3 buckets or iRods to move large amounts of data. So by using CyVerse, which is built on the internet to research internet, we can move a lot of data very quickly onto a virtual machine and do compute on it, and then move that data back off onto the cloud or into the CyVerse data store. CyVerse is partnered with the other NSF supercomputer framework, which is called Exceed. For those of you that haven't heard of that, maybe we can drop a link to the Exceed in the chat. But Exceed and the Open Science Grid are consortiums of universities that operate high performance computing and high throughput computing to the science community. And CyVerse is partnered with these. So when you launch jobs through the discovery environment, you can actually launch jobs in Texas at the Texas Advanced Computing Center, in San Diego at the San Diego Supercomputing Center, in Indiana and Illinois at their different supercomputers which they've built with money from the NSF. And so this framework of supercomputers is all available directly through Exceed or through CyVerse. And these are all on these big fat pipes. So we can move a lot of data pretty quickly, not real fast because it's still over the internet, but far faster than trying to do it over a conventional internet service provider. So by working in the cloud, you're able to leverage these really massive data sets. And hopefully those data sets live next to the compute like they do in the CyVerse data store. And you can do your analyses in a much faster way than if you were to try to move them even over like hard drives through the mail. So what I'm getting at here with this managing data and setting up your iCommands is that I'm going to take you to the terminal for just a few minutes, and we're going to set up a connection back to CyVerse using iCommands. So this might be rudimentary for some of you, and it might be the first time for others that you've ever opened a terminal. So go ahead and click on the terminal, and you'll see it opens up a prompt. And I'm going to try to make this bigger so that everyone can see it. And I'm going to do something fancy real quick. Okay. So what I just did, for those that didn't see it too quickly, was I said export PS1 equals $. And what that does is it redoes the bash prompt. And I just did that because I want you guys to be able to see what it is that I'm doing. So I got rid of that Jovian at the name of the container that this is running on. And so here I am, I'm on a Linux operating system, and I'm at the prompt. So if I type in the word CD, that changes the directory. And if I type in the word L and S, that will list the system, and I can see that there are 2 Python notebooks in my home directory. If I type in CD/home, let's see what happens there. Nothing. Let's try this again. We'll say ls/home. Sorry. I can see that home is actually in the Jovian folder. So this path on the Linux file system. So this is the root of the Linux file system. And there's a folder in here called home. So if I change directory /home/Jovian, and I type in ls, I can see that the two IPython notebooks that I created are here. This is a little tough for people that are not used to working on a command line because you can't actually see the level of the files that we're working on. If I come over here and I click on this file path here, the home folder here is actually this folder that it sees here. So what I want to show you guys real quick, and it won't be real quick, it'll take a few minutes, is how to initiate a connection back to the data store on the command line. So we use a platform in CyVerse called iRods, and iRods has a tool called iCommands, which is built into it. So I can type in the word init. So this is init. What this is going to do is it's going to trigger iCommands to do the configuration for my user. And these instructions are here in the managing data in the cloud section of the workshop. So if you get behind, you can follow it there. But the first question it asked me is to enter the host name of the server to connect to. And so I'm going to type in data.cyverse.org. And so you might remember this morning, I took us to the URL data.cyverse.org. And then it's going to ask for the unique port number. And so 1247 is the port number that our data store talks to over the internet. I'm going to now put in my iRods username. So this is unique to me. You guys are going to put in your usernames here. And then it's going to ask for my iRods zone. So I explained this morning that we used to be called the iPlant Collaborative, that our data store has the zone name iPlant. Unfortunately, when you have a couple billion objects in your data store, it's not so easy to just change the root path to CyVerse. So we're stuck with iPlant. Okay, so I put in the zone name, and now it's asking me for my password. So it's not going to show me the password when I type this in. So the prompt shouldn't move. It's just going to blink. And I enter in my password, and then it returns me back to the prompt. So I'm going to walk through this again because it's going to take you guys a few minutes to catch up. So you type in the word init in the terminal. It then asks you to give it the name of the server. And the server name that you're going to give it is data.cyverse.org. The next thing it's going to ask is to give the port number, which is 1247. Then your username. And then the iRods zone, which is iPlant. And then your password. After you've done that, it should exit back to the bash terminal, and you'll just see a little blinky cursor. What you can now do is type in the command ILS and then press enter. And what that's going to do, it'll show you the contents of your CyVerse data store account. So for those of you that have not used Linux before, the ls command lists the contents of the folder that you're currently in. The iRods command is ILS. So a lot of the iRods commands follow conventional Linux terminology, which we'll teach you guys some more about on Thursday and Friday. But we add the I in front of it. So there are things like ICD in iCommands, which will change the working directory that I was just in. So I could ICD into iPlant, home, tswetnam, AG2PI workshop. And then if I do ILS again, it should be nothing because I didn't have any files in there. So now I'm talking to the data store on the command line. So I'm having it list for me the contents of these different directories. So if I want to see what's in my Neon downloads folder, I can say ILS, iPlant, home, tswetnam, Neon downloads. And it's going to show me a great many folders and files that I've downloaded and I'm hosting in my directory there. So for you as a new user in CyVerse, you probably don't have much in your data store other than your analyses folder. But you could try ILS, iPlant, home, your username / analyses. And it should show you all of your analyses folders which you've run. Okay, I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask for some positive reinforcement. I'm going to check the chat to see how many fires there are. Okay, quickly in the chat, how many of you are still waiting? Oh no, Wilson, I'm so sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is terrible. Okay, we're gonna get this fixed tonight so that on Thursday everyone gets access right away. How many of you that are still waiting still have an RStudio running? If you still have your RStudio running, you can go to RStudio and go to the terminal in RStudio, and you can do these exact same steps. And maybe, let's see, I don't have one running myself. And I'm not going to start another one because I don't want to steal a resource from you guys. Ryan, do you still have your RStudio alive?
I do not.
Okay. You know, I could cheat and show you. I can go to an RStudio I've got running. Okay, so I have an RStudio that I'm running on a server that I own. And it's running the same container that you guys are using. Okay, so if I go to the terminal here in this RStudio, I can type in init, and it's going to ask for the same things: data.cyverse.org, 1247, tsweatnam is my username, iPlant is the zone. I put in my password, and then I can access the data store in the same way. So for those of you that are waiting on your Jupyter Labs to start, I pray that you still have an RStudio open and that you can go to the terminal in RStudio and you can follow these same steps. So the fact that I'm using Jupyter Lab as a terminal or RStudio as a terminal, it shouldn't matter. Oh no. So Kari Park asks, can you use terminal on a Mac OS? You could, but you have not installed iCommands yet. So if I go to the Learning Center for CyVerse and I type in iCommands, I'm going to put this into the chat for you guys. So we have some instructions here about how to install iCommands on your laptops. So Angela, if your iRODS password didn't work, try to do init a second time, and you might have to go through the process again and then try your password a second time. And the iRODS password is the CyVerse password. So for those of you that are interested, you can, let's see, do we have instructions for how to install? Ooh, this took me to our Austria workshop. Let's go to this one. Here we go. Try this other link. Okay, so Miranda typed in the ILS and she only saw the analysis folder. And that's because you're in your main profile on CyVerse and you don't have any other contents yet. So what you could try is, and Eric's giving you some suggestions there. You could come to the data store here and you could do file, create a new file. And then you could create a new file and go to name and then try running ILS in the container again, and you'll see the new file. It should appear in the I commands. What a bummer that you guys are still waiting. Okay, so for those of you that are still waiting on your Jupyter Labs, let's cancel those things. Just kill that analysis and then restart a new one. Okay, so Wilson, if you've got RStudio working, go ahead and follow the instructions in the managing your data in the cloud section in the terminal in RStudio, and it should be the same. I'm just going to go off script for a minute and show you guys something cool while we're waiting for everyone else's instances to come back to life. So what I'm doing here is I've navigated to GitHub and I'm in a repository of a professor who does geospatial analyses. And so Qisheng has done a lot of work to provide open source tools to the community. And he has this folder repository called GEE Map, which is Google Earth Engine Map. And my part of going off script here is that within our Jupyter Labs, we have this little GitHub widget. And I can just paste the URL for Qisheng's container here. And it should take me to his GE map. Let's see why I didn't like that. Let's try, oh, maybe I should get rid of the HTTPS. There we go. Okay, so if I just take his username and his repository name, I can now see the contents of this GitHub repository. And within these, he has notebooks that he's published. So there's something like 60 or 70 notebooks in here. And these notebooks are here for other users to come along and to run the Google Earth Engine. So you can run all of his notebooks basically at the click of a button. So you can just load this and then run the apps. Install this, looks like. So your ability now is to share your work through GitHub. Users come into the container in CyVerse and they're able to reproduce your science. And we have other notebooks available for you guys to try out another day. But hopefully you understand this idea of putting your data up on the internet and then sharing it so that people can come and then use the things that you've provided for them in our infrastructure. Okay, it looks like people are getting instructions to relaunch their instances. It's ridiculous how when it works in less than a minute. And then when it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Do we click the retain box when we rerun it? I don't remember if we clicked that.
No, you don't have to. The retain inputs, no, we didn't actually put any inputs into this folder because the hope was that we were going to download data into it after it was already running. So you can see this thing, I told it to install a package and it went nuts and it installed a bunch of stuff. Okay, I'll just abandon that for now. Okay, so a few of you have gotten your I commands up and running. So you're able to run ILS, home, shared, AG2PI workshop. So if I run the ILS command on the iPlant home shared AG2PI workshop, I'm able to see the contents of the workshop folder. I can now run a command called iget. So if I just type iget and I type in enter, it will show me the manual for iget. So these are all the commands that iget can use. And then it explains to you what all of these things mean. So you can do different flags to download the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say iget, and I'm going to use the verbose flag with the recursive flag and the capital K to verify the checksum flag. And then I'm going to do the dash, there's a B, I think, in here somewhere. Oh, I don't see the B. We'll leave the B off. And then I'll do a P, capital P for progress or progressive. And then I'm going to say / /iPlant home shared AG2PI workshop. I'll try to get this to the top so you can see it. So I have the command iget -v -r -k -p, and then I'm going to download the folder AG2PI workshop. And so now iRods is telling me that it's downloading these files. And so there, I can see them coming, 1 of 88, 12 of 88. And if I look in this folder, the folders have been created, and it's now downloading the data that Ryan has staged for us in the folder. And it looks like this is going to take about a minute or two to download with iCommands. You can see that the speed of these downloads is very slow per file. They're very small files. So one point is that iRods is incredibly fast at moving very large files, but it's very slow at moving lots of small files. And that's partly because iRods is creating a record for every file that it moves, which is good to keep that paper trail, but it slows down this process of getting our data into the VM. And so, for this example, we're taking about 2 minutes to download this data. This is what slows down the launch of your Vice app when you add data to it at launch time. So this same process is going on in the background when you launch a Vice app and you add data to it the first time. So for those of you that were able to restart your Jupyter labs, you saw that they probably started in less than a minute. But when you add data and then launch the app, you have to wait for this process to copy your files over. So for those of you that are now able to do it, you can go through this step of iget, and then you can look at the different flags that are there, and then you can download the contents of the workshop into your Jupyter lab. You can also do this in RStudio. There's no difference between doing this on the command line in RStudio and doing it in Jupyter. Yeah, and Eric's pointing out that the slowness is due to the fact that we're making sure that our transfer is 100% complete and we don't have any errors in our data. So the checksum is checking the quality of the file on the data store and making sure it's identical on the container that we've just copied it to. So that data integrity is a big deal. And so we want to make sure to use those checksums when we move files around. Okay, I'm almost done for today. There's a couple more things I want to show. So we've just copied the contents of the workshop onto the container. Somebody unmute themselves, but are these files that are now in your container in your user profile on the CyVerse data store yet? Does anyone think that these files have been copied to your unique profile yet? No, okay, yeah. So these files are only copied, oh, my office lights just went out. These files are only copied onto the running container. So imagine that you're sitting in a computer lab at a computer and you've just copied files from the internet onto that computer. That's where those files are. They have not gone back into your data store yet. Okay, so Eric is... Okay, so we've just done this command called iget. So we've gotten the files and they've come to our workstation that we're on. So I now have a folder called AG2PI workshop that we can see here, and the data are here. I now want to copy the contents of this folder back to my data store. So to do that, I'm going to use the iput command. So the put command instead of the get command. So I can do iput, and it will show me all of the flags or the options that are available for iput. So I'm going to type in iput, and I'm going to put in the K for the checksum again. I'm going to do it a little different this time. I'm not going to put a dash between my flags. So I'm going to leave them all together. So K for the checksum, P, capital P for progressive, V, lowercase v for kind of verbose, R for recursive, because I want to copy multiple folders from within the AG2PI workshop folder, B for a bulk upload, and then F to force the overwriting of any existing files on the data store. I'm going to then tell it I want AG2PI workshop folder. So I can type in AG2PI, or I can type in AG2 and then tab to autocomplete. Usually in Bash terminals, there's an autocomplete for a folder that will let you know you've typed it correctly. So I've typed in iput-kp-vrbf and then the name of the folder. And now I want to tell it where to go. So I'm going to say iPlant home my username. And I'm going to put a / after my username. So what this is going to do is it's going to copy this folder AG2PI workshop into my CyVerse username account. And so I can see that it's creating the folders and all the subfolders. And now it's going to copy the data. And this should take maybe a couple minutes. We'll see how long it takes. And I'll check the chat again. Okay, so we're seeing some output. It's bulk uploading my 50 files at a time. And it's moved those up, and now it's going to move some more. And so, you know, a lot of you are probably wondering why we're dragging you through the mud and making you do this in the terminal. But when it comes time to move thousands of files or millions of files, generally you don't want to do that by dragging and dropping those into your browser. And so writing scripts, writing things like Python notebooks or R Markdown notebooks, you can use I commands in those notebooks to move hundreds of thousands to millions of objects around the internet. And so the real power and the reproducibility of the science comes from having some basic understanding of moving things around in this command line interface. Okay, so my move is done. It took a couple of minutes. And so I've now copied the contents of the AG2PI workshop from the data store into my Jupyter Lab container. And then I've written them back from the shared directory into my private user directory. So if I come and I look for them here, and I look in my AG2PI workshop folder, I can see that just a few minutes ago, these files were created and now exist in my personal user account. Okay, I would love to see a little ta-da for anyone who's able to do this. All right, one of you has done it. So, I mean, this stuff is really hard. It took me a long time to wrap my head around how all this stuff works. For those of you that this is the first time doing it, don't panic. You know, we're doing this. A lot of this stuff is going to go by really fast. And the intention is just so that you can see us do it one time. And then hopefully when you come back and do it at your own pace using the material we provide online, that you can solve it for yourself. Okay, so Mandeep, it's looking good. It looks like you got your iRods, iCommands set up. So now you're ready to try to do one of the iGet or the iPut commands, or you can even try ILS to see the contents of your data store. And that's, I'll put those instructions into the chat. So Stephen, it looks like you are trying to write the files from your VM to the shared folder. You need to put those into your personal user folder. So it should be iGet, and then it should be iPlant/home/Stephen Paris's username. Okay, we're rapidly dwindling on time. So I just want to show you guys another example of how to move files. So we've been dragging through the iCommands portion. So iCommands is the way that we talk directly to the data store, which is built from iRods. There are other commands for moving files around the internet, and the two most common ones are the wget command and the curl or curl command. And so these two commands can be used to pull files from our WebDAV service, which I mentioned briefly this morning. And so I'm going to do a little trick here. Let me come here and clear my terminal window. I'm going to delete the AG2PI folder. Actually, you know what? I won't. I'll leave it right there. So I'm copy paste this statement, and I'm going to explain it to you. So I'm going to run this time thing in front of the wget command. So it'll tell us how fast this comes. But I'm telling wget to run with the dash lowercase r, which I don't recall what that is. We'll have to do a little search for that. Let me look at that real quick. So if I type in wget help, the lowercase r command means wget has a lot of features. It has so many I can't even find it. Okay, I'll just leave it there for now. So the R commands is recursive to go through many folders. The NP is no parent, so I don't want the parent directory. I'm going to tell it to leave alone the index file. I'm going to cut some of the directory structure, but then I want it to take from the CyVerse workshop. And really what I want to show you is just this, that the wget command for many small files lands up actually being a lot faster than iRods in this particular example, partly because it's not doing a checksum. But using wget, I was able to move the contents of the whole directory in about 6 seconds versus a couple minutes there for the icommands method. Icommands really shows its colors when you move large quantities of data. So if I want to move a multi-gigabyte size file, I would want to use icommands over wget. But you can see I've now copied the contents of this URL, and they've come down as the data.cyverse folder, but then when I look inside it, I can see the AG2PI workshop folders there, and there's the contents. So our ability to move files around the internet is predicated upon us using these other software like wget or curl or icommands to bring files in and out of these containers on the command line. There are other graphic user interface tools that we can use. If we were using a remote desktop, we could actually just use a browser in the remote desktop, or we could use the file manager in the remote desktop to talk directly to the data store the same way we use Cyberduck. Okay, so we're at 1:45, and I know we want to do a little checkout with you guys about how today went. There were definitely some hiccups as far as you guys getting your containers running. Tina, could you put the instant feedback form back in the chat, or maybe Ryan? And then please don't hold back. Let us have it as far as what you thought about today. One important thing is the stuff that you didn't learn about today that you hoped that you had learned about, so that we can address that hopefully on Thursday or Friday. But at this time, Ryan, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, so I just want to, if it was hard to follow along with the iRods commands because the shell is new to you, don't worry about it. The information that Tyson presented is on the Read the Docs page in the Managing Data in the Cloud page. So this will make more sense after we spend some time on Thursday going through the UNIX shell or the bash shell. And you'll start to see the parallels with the icommands and what they do as we learn those with the shell. So don't worry if this was hard to keep up with, difficult. It'll make more sense once we revisit the shell.
let's see, I think there's one more. So one last point about all these things that I just moved into this Jupyter lab. I can download all these files I can download back to my laptop. I can bring all these things back down. Further, if I have data on my laptop that I want to upload to this Jupyter lab, I can just upload it directly right here. So I don't actually have to log into CyVerse again or go through the data store to move files onto my running instances. And this is the same as for RStudio. So you can upload and download files natively in Jupyter and in RStudio from your laptop. So if you're not able to move things on the command line, you don't want to move things on the command line, you could use Cyberduck to download the contents of the workshop onto your laptop and then drag those contents back up into the integrated development environment here in your browser. So you can do it whatever way is most comfortable for you going forward. And maybe you're going to be lucky and you won't need to learn the command line for the rest of your career. But this is just one option that you guys can pursue if this is of interest to you.
Okay, so just to wrap up a bit in the last minutes that we have. So like just the why of the Jupyter Lab or iRods is these are tools that are available, and the purpose is very similar to like what I talked about at the beginning of this afternoon. Using iRods is like it takes a bit of practice to get it down. I remember when I first started using it that I kept forgetting like what the port number was, or I'd enter in like just cyverse.org for the DNS and I'd run into all these errors. But after you do it a few times, it really starts to make some sense, especially when you're moving around big files. So like we were working with some genomic data, which produces like gigabytes worth of information. So it made sense for me to invest the time in iRods. So like Tyson said, thinking about the files you work with, the size of the files can kind of help prioritize like what might be the first thing that you need to do. Is it just uploading it to the data store directly? Is it using Cyberduck? Or are the files so big that investing the time in learning iRods beneficial, right? So I think that's something that's worth thinking about, and thinking about your use case, right? Like, because when I move around tabular phenotyping data, the files are not that big generally. I can just drag and drop them from my computer into the data store, and it's not that big of a deal to upload that. But when you're working with genomic data or imaging data, that's when it becomes useful for offloading the analysis into the cloud, but also for collaboration and reproducibility and hosting those data on CyVerse. So that's when this stuff kind of becomes beneficial, right? So I just wanted to emphasize that it's, thinking about your use case of managing your data in the cloud. What kind of data are you generating, or what kind of data is your lab generating that would fit into this infrastructure that we have available for you? So that's something to think about coming into Thursday. Maybe Thursday morning we'll kind of kick it off before we start the shell with what kind of just generally what sorts of data are people working with, because that's a good indicator of what you might need.
Are there anyone here that can think about how they could use RStudio or Jupyter Lab for their AG2PI work that they want to talk about right now that doesn't work at CyVerse?
Yeah, feel free to either unmute yourself or just drop. Feel comfortable with.
I've used Jupyter Notebook with students before for biocoding with Python so that they can process DNA sequences to RNA sequences with Jason Williams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these Jupyter containers, you can download a vanilla one, like we have this SciPy one, and then you could install your bioinformatic libraries into that container, which could take 20-30 minutes. Create a new container and then host that in CyVerse so that it doesn't take 30 minutes every time you start a new one to do the analysis. So there's sort of a break point between having a vanilla container and then having one that's got all the things in it that you need to start out with right away when you start a class.
Does anybody else have a use case that they would like to share?
I was trying to get to where we could do our status here, but it doesn't want to let you guys know. Bummer. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think we're ready to hang it up. So did we get the instant feedback into the chat? Yeah, there it is. Thank you, Tina. Yeah, so maybe we can end 5 minutes early after you guys have filled out your instant feedback forms.
Tyson, someone also asked about some of the tech language. So I'm going to put in a link to our glossary there, which may help.
So we had to make a glossary mostly for ourselves, but also for our poor students. So the link that Tina shared with you is to a week-long workshop, or excuse me, it was a week-long workshop that we turned into a semester-long course on foundational open science skills. We're actually flying the advertisement for that course starting in February if anyone wants to spend more time with us. But building up these data science skills takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But the FOSS course is there to help you guys kind of ease into it. And it has a lot of the same components that we're going through with this. Earlier today, someone asked about other places they can go to learn about stuff like this. I would strongly encourage you to check out Software Carpentry, or it's called thecarpentries.org. And you can see that they have a large number of self-paced tutorials for learning about R, Python, and these other languages. And you can even attend nowadays virtual workshops to gain some of those skills.
Yeah, and with the carpentries, just to further plug the carpentries, since some of us are certified carpentries instructors or in the process of being certified. There's the data carpentries, which is a lot more targeted. So like if you're working with genomics data, there's like a specific tutorial that walks you through the shell, R version control, and then looking at genomic data in R. Thanks, Meg. But then the software carpentry is a lot more general, like how do you program? Like what are the fundamentals of programming going through the shell to version control to the language of your choosing. So similar, a lot of the content for this workshop is informed from that, but it's a good place to start. We have like a pretty strong carpentries community at the University of Arizona. And when we were doing in-person things, there was a lot of workshops available. So maybe that's something to also keep an eye out for at your institution. If people are running carpentries workshops, it could be beneficial to go in there, and or if you feel comfortable after this, go be a helper, help other people learn. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for suffering through 5 hours of Zoom with us today. And we'll be ready to do this again on Thursday.
Yeah, thank you all for taking the time to attend.